Hey guys, Jason here, bringing you another episode, if you can call it that, of DM Discussion, where I take what I deem to be important issues in the DMTCG and share my thoughts with you. Today I'm going to talk about two of the deck types that lay the foundation for how our game is played. I like to describe them as the fundamental play styles. I'll be quickly going over what these decks are before sharing some deck building tips for each of them. The first one I'll talk about can be referred to as rush, aggro, beatdown, whatever you want to call it. The idea is you keep attacking your opponent until they are dead. For simplicity's sake, I will refer to it as aggro. They're characterized by employing many low-cost cards, being skewed more towards creatures than spells, and focusing on a strong early game. They tend to play max copies of as few unique cards as possible, and keep the deck size to a minimum. Examples of these decks are those which employ 1-mana creatures, alongside some blocker hate and speed attackers, or decks which focus on low-cost evolutions which aim to apply early pressure. My first tip for aggro decks is to go easy on the techs. Shed the mindset of, oh, maybe I'll include this just in case. The reason for this is because I feel like aggro decks typically don't have the same flexibility control decks do, because of how quickly they're meant to end games. One of the inherent strengths of the style is its consistency, and in most cases, including a few copies of a certain card meant to only help in certain situations is going to destroy value over the long run. Let's say I have a Firelight Rush deck. Paloelosis might seem like a reasonable inclusion because it puts your creatures out of range for several fire kill spells. The thing is, that might help in certain situations, but including more copies of it hinders your ability to execute your strategy, thereby compromising your consistency and matchup spread. So, yeah, because it doesn't help the ultimate goal of the deck, it's probably not worth it. My second tip for aggro decks is to think carefully about how you want to flowchart your turns. I know this is the case for every deck, but I feel like it's especially important for this sort of style, considering how many of these types of decks operate on a very low mana count, and to keep up the pressure, it's important to be able to play cards every turn. Quite often, we might want to include cards that look great on paper, but in practice don't synergize with the deck at all. I think some of our favorite come into play effect creatures are the culprits here. Going back to our previous example of a Firelight Rush deck, Magress is an awesome card because it's a +1 and it has some respectable stats. However, he flowcharts very poorly in this deck because if we're even getting to 4 mana, we'd probably rather do something else like play a Comet Missile with a speed attacker or play Larva Gear as a speed attacker. More often than not, summoning a clumsy creature isn't going to add value to your game. These are both my roundabout ways of saying just make your deck as consistent as you can. If you choose cards that are key to the central strategy of the deck, you can't go wrong. Now for the next style. You guys like my videos, but I'm sure you hate them, but I love them. Control decks. The focus here is to out-resource our opponents and either finish them off slowly while depleting their resources, or to use a special boss monster to seal the game. In reality, it's really both. Quantities will vary from card to card, and more often than not, they will be bigger than their speedier counterparts. They're characterized by their typically slow nature, ability to problem solve out of sticky situations, and grindy playstyle. Control decks are more generic in the sense that they don't really follow a specific theme outside maybe a select boss monster. They mostly play a lot of good cards that happen to work well together. Elements of a control deck you'll typically see are discard, abundance of spot removal, and board clear. My first tip is to, as one of my other videos suggested, smooth out the mana curve. So often we are willing to duke it out with power card after power card in the late game, which, while fun in its own perverse way, is not the best strategy if you're looking for a consistent deck, or at least one that doesn't completely fold to hyper-aggressive decks. I really don't think taking a dice roll early is worth a superior late game. I also believe that having the flexibility in mana cost is actually beneficial in the long run against all types of decks, because not only will you actually have an early game presence, but you will also be able to squeeze more value out of your mana in the late game. Some neat cards under 3 mana you could consider adding, which all add value in their own ways, are Ghost Touch, Spiral Gate, Farzi the Oracle, Essence Elf, Crimson Hammer, Melanie the Aqua Shadow, Rain of Arrows, or some 2-mana blockers. These are just ones I thought of off the top of my head. In reality, there are probably a couple more that could make the list. My other tip is to remember it's all about balance. I view the playstyle as a balance between controlling the hand and controlling the field while spending resources to find the appropriate cards. This means we can't just throw in whichever cards sort of fit the bill. It's important to test and think about what we are dedicating our precious slots to. Evaluate why each of your cards is present and whether you're utilizing your slots the best way you can. For example, while it might be tempting to include both Terror Pit and Natural Snare in a Water Dark Nature control deck, one could argue they pretty much do the same thing, and the slots for one could be dedicated to something else entirely, like some sort of board clear, more discard, or mana nexus. Look at your cards, test your deck, and determine whether or not a role is being excessively duplicated. So that was my bite-sized analysis/advice piece. I feel like these two fundamental styles fall on completely opposite ends of the spectrum, and this video was only meant to scrape the surface. In practice, a lot of decks will likely fall somewhere in between depending on what the player is going for, and that is what Andrew is going to cover for us in the next video. Keeping with the schedule, we were planning to start our rankings lists in April, so I thought it would be nice to do 2 DM discussions over deck styles back to back. Going back to the matter at hand though, the thing all of my tips have in common is that they keep the central strategy at the forefront of deck building. I just learned these through experience and in many instances trial and error. My hope is that you guys are able to learn from my experience or at least see some value in my thought process. If you think I'm a fraud and I'm completely wrong, I hope you at least enjoyed listening to me ramble for the past few minutes, and just know that I appreciate your time and support, and it'll actually be Andrew seeing you guys in the next video, so until next time.